In a bustling courtroom in downtown Chicago, the air was thick with anticipation. The room buzzed with murmurs as people shifted in their seats, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the man at the center of it all, Chuck Norris. Known for his legendary martial arts skills and larger-than-life persona, Norris had spent decades building a reputation that seemed unshakable. But today, that reputation was on trial. Facing him across the courtroom was Judge John Roberts, a man known for his stern demeanor and unwavering commitment to the law. This case wasn't about movie stunts or action-packed fight scenes. It was about something much more serious, an accusation that could tarnish Norris's legacy forever. The charges against Norris stemmed from allegations that one of his business ventures had violated environmental laws. A local river, once pristine and teeming with life, had been found contaminated with toxic waste. Evidence pointed to Norris's company as the source of the pollution. According to prosecutors, the company had knowingly dumped hazardous materials into the river and then attempted to cover it up. Witnesses had come forward, testifying under oath about what they had seen. Documents were presented, showing deliberate efforts to hide the illegal activity. It was a damning case, and Norris's team struggled to counter the overwhelming evidence. Throughout the trial, Norris sat stoically beside his lawyer, Daniel Hayes. Though he rarely spoke, his presence dominated the room. People whispered among themselves, wondering if the man who had taken down countless villains on screen would be able to fight his way out of this real-life predicament. Norris's supporters filled the gallery, hoping against hope that the judge would show leniency. On the other side of the aisle, members of the community affected by the pollution watched with bated breath, eager to see justice served. Judge Roberts listened intently as both sides presented their arguments. He took notes, his expression unreadable. When it was time for the verdict, the courtroom fell silent. All eyes turned to the judge as he adjusted his glasses and began to speak. His voice was calm but firm, each word carrying the weight of authority. After careful consideration of the evidence, he said, pausing briefly to survey the room, "I find the defendant, Chuck Norris, guilty of violating environmental laws." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Norris remained still, his face betraying no emotion, but those close to him could see the tension in his jaw. The judge continued, explaining that the severity of the crime warranted a substantial punishment. For the harm caused to the environment and the community, he declared, "I hereby impose a fine of $100 million. The number hung in the air like a thunderclap, reverberating through the room. Reporters scrambled to jot down notes, while photographers snapped pictures of Norris, capturing the moment that would soon dominate headlines around the world. Daniel Hayes, Norris's lawyer, looked visibly shaken. He leaned over to whisper something to his client, but Norris simply nodded, his gaze fixed ahead. Outside the courthouse, chaos erupted as news vans lined the streets and reporters shouted questions at anyone willing to speak. Norris's publicist, Lisa Monroe, tried her best to shield him from the frenzy, guiding him toward a waiting car. She knew this was just the beginning of a long and difficult road ahead. Back inside the courtroom, the atmosphere remained tense. As the gavel struck to signal the end of the session, Judge Roberts made one final statement. Leaning forward slightly, he locked eyes with Norris and said, "This isn't over, not by a long shot." The words were simple, yet they carried an air of mystery that left everyone puzzled. What did he mean? Was there more to come? Or was it merely a warning? For Norris, the verdict was a blow unlike any he had faced before. Used to being the hero, the one who always came out on top, he now found himself cast in the role of the villain. The fine was staggering, and the damage to his reputation was incalculable. Yet, despite the gravity of the situation, Norris maintained his composure. He knew better than to react impulsively. Instead, he focused on finding answers and figuring out how to move forward. As the day wore on, the story spread like wildfire. Social media exploded with reactions, ranging from outrage to disbelief. Some defended Norris, claiming he couldn't possibly be responsible for such a heinous act. Others demanded accountability, arguing that even celebrities weren't above the law. Amid the noise, one name kept surfacing, that of Judge John Roberts. Known for his integrity and fairness, Roberts had earned a reputation as a no-nonsense jurist. But his cryptic remark lingered in people's minds, fueling speculation about what might happen next. Across town, a young investigative journalist named Ryan Carter followed the developments closely. Ryan had built a career uncovering stories that others overlooked, and this one intrigued him. There was something about the case that didn't sit right. Sure, the evidence against Norris was strong, but the judge's parting words hinted at a deeper layer to the story. Late that night, hunched over his desk in a dimly lit apartment, Ryan began piecing together the details. He scoured court records, reviewed witness statements, and reached out to sources. Something told him this wasn't just a straightforward legal battle, it was personal. Ryan's instincts were confirmed when he received an anonymous tip pointing him toward old records involving Judge Roberts. The message was vague but compelling. Look into Victor Lane. Ryan had never heard the name before, but he trusted his gut. Early the next morning, he set out to track down anyone who might know more about Lane and his connection to the case. His search eventually led him to Margaret Klein, an elderly woman living in a quiet suburb outside Chicago. Margaret was hesitant at first, reluctant to dredge up painful memories from the past, but Ryan persisted, assuring her that he only wanted the truth. Finally, she agreed to talk. Over tea in her modest living room, she revealed a secret she had kept buried for decades. Victor Lane, her late husband, had once been a small-time contractor who worked on projects for Norris's company. Years ago, Lane had been prosecuted for a crime he claimed he didn't commit. Despite his pleas of innocence, no one believed him, not even Judge Roberts, who had presided over the case. Lane died shortly after serving time, leaving Margaret and their daughter to pick up the pieces. Margaret's revelation painted a troubling picture. She hinted that someone close to Norris might have orchestrated the framing to protect their interests. Ryan realized this could be the key to unraveling the entire case. Armed with new information, he decided to reach out to Norris's team, hoping they'd listen. To his surprise, Lisa Monroe, Norris's publicist, agreed to arrange a meeting. Norris, eager to clear his name, welcomed the opportunity to hear Ryan out. During their clandestine meeting, Ryan laid out his theory, connecting Lane's death to the recent scandal. At first, Norris dismissed it as mere speculation. But when Ryan presented Margaret's testimony and old financial records linking Norris's former CFO, Alan Drake, to suspicious transactions, Norris grew silent. It became clear that Drake might have acted without Norris's knowledge, implicating him in the crime. Determined to set things right, Norris decided to cooperate fully with authorities, offering to pay the fine and fund a cleanup effort for the polluted river. Meanwhile, Judge Roberts prepared for a follow-up hearing. When the day arrived, the courtroom was packed once again. This time, however, the mood was different. Instead of delivering another harsh sentence, Roberts revealed why he had spoken those 6 enigmatic words. He admitted that he had known Victor Lane personally and carried guilt for not believing his innocence. His harsh ruling against Norris was meant to force the truth into the open, and it worked. With Alan Drake arrested and charged for his role in the scheme, Norris faced a reduced penalty due to his cooperation. More importantly, he pledged millions to support environmental causes and established a foundation in Victor Lane's name to help families affected by corporate misconduct. Judge Roberts, though initially portrayed as ruthless, earned respect for his unconventional approach to justice. As the dust settled, Ryan Carter published an exposé detailing the full story, earning widespread acclaim for his work. Margaret Klein finally found closure, knowing her husband's name had been cleared. And Norris, humbled by the experience, vowed to use his influence for good moving forward. In the end, Judge Roberts' 6 words proved prophetic. This isn't over, not by a long shot. They weren't just a warning, they were a promise that justice, however delayed, would prevail. The courtroom was silent as Judge John Roberts' final words echoed through the space. This isn't over, not by a long shot. For a moment, no one moved. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on everyone present. Chuck Norris, usually calm and composed, felt a chill run down his spine. What did the judge mean? Was there more to come? or was it simply a dramatic way to end the hearing? Norris exchanged a glance with his lawyer, Daniel Hayes, but neither man spoke. Outside, reporters were already buzzing, trying to decipher the meaning behind those 6 cryptic words. As Norris stepped out of the courthouse, the crowd erupted into chaos. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust toward him, and voices shouted. Questions from every direction. Mr. Norris, what do you have to say about the verdict? Do you plan to appeal? How will you pay the fine? His publicist, Lisa Monroe, quickly stepped in, doing her best to shield him from the frenzy. She ushered him toward a waiting car, but not before he paused briefly to address the crowd. I respect the court's decision, he said firmly, his voice steady despite the storm around him. But I'm committed to finding the truth no matter where it leads. Back in his hotel suite later that evening, Norris sat alone staring at the city lights outside his window. He had always prided himself on being a man of integrity, someone who stood up for what was right. But now, he found himself painted as the villain in a story he barely understood. The fine was staggering, but it wasn't the money that troubled him most. It was the accusation itself, the idea that he could be responsible for something so harmful. Norris knew he needed answers, and he knew he couldn't do it alone. He called Lisa and asked her to gather his team first thing in the morning. They would need to dig deeper, uncover any hidden truths, and fight to clear his name. Meanwhile, across town, Ryan Carter sat hunched over his desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and open files on his laptop. Ryan was a young investigative journalist, with a knack for uncovering stories that others missed. He had been following the Norris case closely, drawn to its complexity and the unanswered questions lurking beneath the surface. Judge Roberts' parting remark had stuck with him. Why would a seasoned jurist drop such a mysterious hint unless there was more to the story? Ryan's instincts told him this wasn't just a straightforward legal battle. It went deeper than that. Late that night, Ryan received an anonymous tip via email. The message was brief but intriguing. Look into Victor Lane. Ryan had never heard the name before, but something about it caught his attention. He spent hours combing through old newspaper archives, court records, and public databases, piecing together fragments of information. What he discovered was unsettling. Victor Lane had been a small-time contractor who worked on projects tied to Norris's company decades earlier. According to the records, Lane had been prosecuted for fraud and sentenced to prison. Tragically, he died shortly after serving his time, leaving behind a widow and a young daughter. Ryan's curiosity deepened. He decided to track down anyone who might know more about Lane and his connection to the current case. After some digging, he discovered that Lane's widow, Margaret Klein, still lived in a quiet suburb outside Chicago. Early the next morning, Ryan drove to her home, hoping she might shed light on the mystery. When he arrived, he found a modest house with flower beds lining the front yard. An elderly woman answered the door, her face lined with age but kind. This was Margaret Klein. At first, Margaret was hesitant to speak. She had spent years trying to put the past behind her, and revisiting those memories was painful. But Ryan explained why he was there, assuring her that he only wanted the truth. Slowly, she opened up. Over tea in her cozy living room, she recounted the events that had shattered her family's life. Victor Lane, her husband, had been a hard-working man who took pride in his craft. He had landed a contract with Norris's company years ago, working on construction projects related to their business ventures. Things had gone smoothly until one day when Victor was accused of embezzling funds. Despite his protests of innocence, no one believed him, not even Judge John Roberts, who had presided over the case. Margaret's voice trembled as she described how Victor had tried to prove his innocence, submitting evidence and pleading his case. But the system had failed him. Sentenced to 5 years in prison, he struggled to cope with the injustice. When he was finally released, he was a broken man. Just months later, he passed away from a heart attack, leaving Margaret and their daughter to fend for themselves. Victor always said someone set him up, Margaret confessed, tears welling in her eyes. He believed it was someone high up, someone who wanted to protect their own interests. Ryan listened intently, scribbling notes as Margaret spoke. Her story painted a troubling picture, one that suggested corruption and betrayal. If Victor Lane had indeed been framed, it meant the roots of this scandal ran far deeper than anyone realized. Before leaving, Ryan thanked Margaret for sharing her story and promised to keep her updated on his findings. As he drove back to the city, his mind raced with possibilities. Could Victor Lane's case somehow be connected to the recent charges against Chuck Norris? And if so, what role did Judge Roberts play in all of this? Later that afternoon, Ryan met with his editor, Karen Miller, to discuss his progress. Karen was skeptical at first, urging Ryan to tread carefully. Investigating a case involving someone as famous as Chuck Norris came with risks, and she didn't want him to jump to conclusions without solid proof. But Ryan was convinced he was onto something. "There's more here than meets the eye," he insisted. "If we can connect the dots, we might uncover a story that changes everything." Karen agreed to give him a little more time to gather evidence, but she warned him to stay objective. "Just because it sounds dramatic doesn't mean it's true," she reminded him. Ryan nodded, knowing she was right. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was closing in on something big. That evening, Ryan decided to reach out to Norris's team. He sent an email to Lisa Monroe explaining his findings and requesting a meeting. To his surprise, Lisa responded almost immediately, agreeing to arrange a discussion. She, too, was desperate for answers, and Ryan's theory offered a glimmer of hope. The following day, Ryan found himself sitting across from Norris and his team in a private conference room at a downtown office building. Ryan laid out his theory, connecting Victor Lane's death to the recent scandal. At first, Norris seemed skeptical, dismissing it as mere speculation. But as Ryan presented Margaret's testimony and old financial records linking Norris's former CFO, Alan Drake, to suspicious transactions, Norris's expression changed. It became clear that Drake might have acted without Norris's knowledge, implicating him in the crime. Norris leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as the weight of the revelation sank in. "If this is true," he said quietly, "then I've been played." Determined to set things right, Norris made a bold decision. He instructed his team to cooperate fully with authorities, offering to pay the fine and fund a cleanup effort for the polluted river. He also pledged to establish a foundation in Victor Lane's name, dedicated to helping families affected by corporate misconduct. It was a step toward redemption, but Norris knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. He had trusted the wrong people, and now he had to make amends, not just for himself but for those whose lives had been ruined by the actions of others. As the days passed, news of Norris's cooperation spread, sparking mixed reactions. Some praised him for taking responsibility, while others remained skeptical, questioning whether he was truly innocent or simply trying to salvage his reputation. Meanwhile, Judge Roberts prepared for a follow-up hearing, knowing the final chapter of this story was yet to be written. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: the truth was beginning to surface and nothing would ever be the same again. The follow-up hearing was scheduled for the following week, and anticipation hung thick in the air. Chuck Norris spent the days leading up to it in quiet reflection, poring over documents and listening intently as his team worked tirelessly to piece together the puzzle. Ryan Carter had become a key ally, providing crucial information that shed light on Alan Drake's suspicious activities. Norris couldn't help but feel a mix of anger and guilt. Anger at Drake for betraying him and guilt for not catching the signs earlier. He knew he had trusted the wrong person, and now it was time to make things right. On the morning of the hearing, Norris arrived at the courthouse early, dressed in a dark suit with a somber expression etched across his face. The media frenzy outside was even more intense than before, with reporters shouting questions and cameras flashing nonstop. Lisa Monroe did her best to shield him from the chaos, guiding him through the crowd with practiced efficiency. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. The benches were filled with spectators, including Margaret Klein, who had been invited by Norris's team to attend. Her presence added an emotional weight to the proceedings, a reminder of the lives affected by the scandal. Judge John Roberts entered the room moments later, his gavel striking the sound block to call the session to order. His demeanor was calm, but resolute, his eyes scanning the room before settling on Norris. "This court reconvenes to address unresolved matters pertaining to the case," he began, his voice steady and authoritative. "Recent developments have come to light, and it is my duty to ensure that justice is served fully and fairly." Daniel Hayes, Norris's lawyer, stood up to address the judge. He outlined the findings uncovered by Ryan Carter and the team, presenting evidence that pointed to Alan Drake as the mastermind behind the illegal dumping and subsequent cover-up. Documents showed unauthorized transactions and forged signatures, all linked directly to Drake. Hayes argued that Norris had been unaware of these actions and had been unfairly implicated due to Drake's betrayal. "My client has taken full responsibility for the harm caused," Hayes said firmly. "He has pledged to pay the fine, fund the cleanup efforts, and establish a foundation to support those affected. But we ask this court to recognize that Mr. Norris himself is a victim of deception." When it was Judge Roberts' turn to speak, the room fell silent. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed on Norris. "Mr. Norris," he began, his tone measured, "you stand here today as both a defendant and perhaps a victim of circumstances beyond your control. However, the law does not excuse negligence, nor does it tolerate ignorance when it leads to such grave consequences." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "That said, I commend you for your willingness to cooperate and take steps toward restitution. It takes courage to admit fault and seek redemption." Roberts then turned his attention to the matter of Victor Lane. For the first time, he spoke openly about his connection to the case, revealing details that shocked everyone in attendance. "Years ago, I presided over the trial of Victor Lane," he admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "At the time, I believed the evidence against him was irrefutable, but over the years, doubts crept into my mind. I came to realize that I may have failed him and his family by not seeking deeper truths." He glanced briefly at Margaret Klein, who sat quietly in the gallery, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The judge continued, explaining why he had delivered such a harsh sentence against Norris initially. "I imposed the fine not only as punishment, but also as a means to expose the truth. I suspected there was more to this story, and I hoped the severity of the penalty would force those involved to come forward. In that regard, my strategy appears to have worked." His admission left many in the room stunned. Some whispered among themselves, while others simply stared at the judge in disbelief. With the truth beginning to unravel, the focus shifted squarely onto Alan Drake. Investigators had already arrested him based on the evidence presented, and he was now facing charges of fraud, conspiracy, and environmental violations. During the hearing, excerpts from Drake's interrogation were read aloud, painting a damning picture of greed and corruption. According to Drake, he had orchestrated the entire scheme to protect his own interests, knowing full well that Norris would bear the brunt of the blame if anything went wrong. "I never thought it would blow up like this," Drake reportedly confessed during questioning. "I just wanted to keep my job and make sure nothing got traced back to me." As the hearing drew to a close, Judge Roberts delivered his final ruling. While Norris still bore some responsibility for failing to oversee his company's operations more closely, the judge acknowledged that the bulk of the wrongdoing rested with Drake. The original $100 million fine was reduced significantly, though. Norris agreed to pay the remaining amount voluntarily, as part of his commitment to making amends. Additionally, he pledged to double the funds allocated for the river cleanup and expand the scope of the foundation he planned to establish in Victor Lane's name. Outside the courthouse, Norris addressed the gathered crowd, flanked by Lisa Monroe and Ryan Carter. "Today marks the beginning of a new chapter, not just for me but for everyone impacted by these events," he said, his voice strong and sincere. "I have learned painful lessons about trust, accountability, and the importance of doing what's right, even when it's difficult. Moving forward, I will dedicate myself to ensuring that no one else suffers because of mistakes like mine." Ryan Carter watched the scene unfold with a sense of satisfaction. His investigation had played a pivotal role in uncovering the truth, and he felt proud to have contributed to justice being served. Later that day, he met with Karen Miller, his editor, to discuss publishing his exposé. Together, they crafted a narrative that highlighted the complexities of the case while emphasizing the themes of redemption and accountability. The article would go on to receive widespread acclaim, earning Ryan recognition as one of the most tenacious journalists in the field. Margaret Klein, meanwhile, found solace in knowing that her husband's name had finally been cleared. After years of carrying the burden of injustice, she felt a weight lifted off her shoulders. Norris personally reached out to her after the hearing, expressing his condolences and promising to honor Victor's memory through the foundation. "Thank you," she told him softly during their meeting. "This doesn't bring Victor back, but it gives us peace knowing the truth has come out." For Judge Roberts, the case served as a reminder of the complexities of justice and the importance of seeking the whole truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. His decision to impose such a harsh sentence, and his cryptic remark afterward, had sparked controversy. But in the end, it had led to the exposure of a much larger conspiracy. As he packed up his belongings at the end of the day, he reflected on the outcome. Justice, he realized, wasn't always black and white. Sometimes it required patience, persistence, and a willingness to challenge assumptions. In the weeks that followed, Norris threw himself into his efforts to make amends. He visited the polluted river, meeting with local residents and environmental experts to discuss restoration plans. He also worked closely with Ryan Carter to document the progress, using his platform to raise awareness about corporate responsibility and environmental protection. The experience had humbled him, forcing him to confront his own shortcomings and reevaluate his priorities. As the dust settled, the story of Chuck Norris, Judge John Roberts, and the mysterious 6 words that flipped the script became a testament to the power of truth and accountability. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments there is always hope for redemption, if one is willing to fight for it. And for those involved, it was a lesson they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. The days following the hearing were a whirlwind of activity for Chuck Norris. With the truth finally coming to light, he focused all his energy on making amends and rebuilding trust, not just with the public but also with himself. The scandal had shaken him deeply, forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths about his leadership and the people he had trusted. He knew that paying fines and funding cleanup efforts wasn't enough. He needed to take meaningful action to prove he was truly committed to change. Norris began by visiting the polluted river personally, accompanied by environmental experts, local community members, and even Margaret Klein. He walked along the banks, listening intently as people shared how the pollution had impacted their lives. Fishermen spoke of empty nets and ruined livelihoods, while parents expressed fears about their children playing near the water. Norris listened without interrupting, nodding solemnly as each person spoke. "I understand now what this has cost you," he said at one point, his voice filled with genuine remorse. "And I promise we'll fix it together." Back in Chicago, Norris worked closely with environmental organizations to design a comprehensive restoration plan. The project included not only cleaning up the river, but also implementing measures to prevent future contamination. He hired teams of scientists, engineers, and volunteers, ensuring they had the resources needed to get the job done. Progress was slow at first, but Norris remained patient, knowing that real change took time. Every week he visited the site to check on the progress and meet with workers, often rolling up his sleeves to help with manual labor. His presence inspired others to join the effort, and soon the cleanup became a community-wide initiative. Meanwhile, Ryan Carter continued to document every step of the journey. His exposé had already gained widespread attention, but he wanted to go further. He believed the story of Norris's redemption could inspire others to take responsibility for their actions and work toward positive change. With Norris's permission, Ryan embedded himself in the cleanup project, interviewing volunteers, residents, and experts. He captured powerful images of the river's transformation, from murky waters littered with debris to clear streams teeming with life. Each photograph told a story of hope and resilience. As the weeks turned into months, Norris shifted his focus to establishing the foundation in Victor Lane's name. He envisioned it as more than just a charitable organization. It would be a platform to advocate for corporate accountability and support families affected by similar injustices. Working alongside Margaret Klein, he helped draft its mission statement and core values. "We want to honor Victor's memory by fighting for fairness and transparency," Norris explained during a meeting with the Foundation's board members. "No family should have to suffer like yours did." Margaret played an active role in shaping the Foundation, sharing her experiences and offering guidance. For years, she had felt powerless, unable to clear her husband's name or hold those responsible accountable. Now she finally had a chance to make a difference. "Victor always believed in doing the right thing," she said during a speech at the Foundation's launch event. "I know he'd be proud of what we're building here today." Her words brought tears to many eyes, including Norris's. While Norris worked tirelessly to rebuild his reputation, Judge John Roberts reflected on the case's broader implications. Though he had initially faced criticism for his harsh ruling, public opinion began to shift as the truth came out. Many praised him for his unconventional approach, recognizing that his tough stance had ultimately led to justice being served. Still, Roberts couldn't shake the lingering guilt over Victor Lane's case. He reached out to Margaret privately, apologizing for failing to see the truth back then. "I wish I could turn back time and do things differently," he admitted. "But I hope my actions now can help bring some closure." Roberts kept his promise by advocating for reforms within the legal system to prevent similar miscarriages of justice. He gave speeches at law schools, urging young lawyers and judges to remain vigilant and question assumptions. "Justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoing," he said during one lecture. "It's about seeking the truth no matter how hard it may be to find." His words resonated with audiences, sparking important conversations about ethics and accountability. Alan Drake's trial dominated headlines throughout this period, serving as a stark reminder of the consequences of greed and corruption. Evidence against him was overwhelming, and he eventually pleaded guilty to multiple charges. During sentencing, the judge condemned his actions, emphasizing the harm caused to both the environment and innocent individuals like Victor Lane. Drake was sentenced to prison and ordered to pay restitution, though the damage he had inflicted couldn't be undone. For Norris, seeing Drake held accountable provided a small measure of closure. Despite the progress, challenges remained. Critics continued to question whether Norris's efforts were sincere or merely an attempt to salvage his image. Some accused him of using his wealth and fame to buy forgiveness, while others argued that no amount of money could undo the harm caused. Norris didn't shy away from these criticisms. Instead, he acknowledged them openly. "I know I can't erase the past," he said during an interview, "but I can learn from it and try to make things better. That's all any of us can do." Over time, Norris's sincerity began to win people over. Local residents who had once doubted him started to see him as a partner rather than a celebrity, trying to redeem himself. Volunteers working on the river cleanup grew to admire his dedication, noting how often he showed up early and stayed late. Even some of his harshest critics softened their stance, admitting that his actions spoke louder than words. "He's putting in the work," one resident remarked. "That's something you can't fake." Ryan Carter's expose reached new heights when it was published as a feature article in a national magazine. The piece chronicled the entire saga, from the initial accusations against Norris to the uncovering of Alan Drake's crimes and the eventual redemption arc. It highlighted themes of accountability, forgiveness, and the power of truth, resonating with readers across the country. The article earned Ryan numerous accolades, solidifying his reputation as a fearless journalist willing to dig deep for the truth. More importantly, it brought renewed attention to the issues of environmental protection and corporate misconduct. For Margaret Klein, the foundation became a source of healing and purpose. She spent countless hours mentoring families who had been wronged by similar injustices, offering them advice and encouragement. Seeing Victor's name associated with something so positive gave her a sense of peace she hadn't felt in decades. "This is what he would have wanted," she often said, smiling softly, "to help others." As the months passed, Norris found himself changed in ways he hadn't anticipated. The experience had humbled him, teaching him valuable lessons about trust, responsibility, and the importance of staying grounded. He realized that being a hero wasn't about performing extraordinary feats. It was about doing the right thing, even when it was difficult. And sometimes that meant admitting when you were wrong. By the end of the year, the river had transformed dramatically. Fish returned to its waters, birds nested along its banks, and children played safely nearby once again. A grand reopening ceremony was held to celebrate the milestone, attended by hundreds of people, including Norris, Margaret, Ryan, and Judge Roberts. As Norris stood before the crowd, he reflected on how far they had come. "This river is more than just water," he said, his voice steady and heartfelt. "It's a symbol of hope, resilience, and the power of coming together to make things right." The crowd erupted into applause, cheering not just for the restored river but for the journey that had led them there. For Norris, it was a moment of vindication, a testament to the fact that even after falling from grace, it was possible to rise again. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but he knew he was ready to face whatever challenges lay in store. After all, he had learned that true strength wasn't about never failing. It was about having the courage to keep moving forward no matter what. The ripple effects of Chuck Norris's journey toward redemption continued to spread far beyond the courtroom and the polluted river. What had started as a scandal that tarnished his reputation evolved into a movement that inspired countless others to take action in their own communities. The foundation named after Victor Lane became a beacon of hope, not just for families affected by corporate misconduct, but for anyone seeking justice and accountability. Its success was a testament to the power of collaboration and determination. Norris threw himself fully into the foundation's work, traveling across the country to speak at conferences, town halls, and schools. He shared his story openly, never shying away from discussing his mistakes or the lessons he had learned. "I used to think being strong meant never making mistakes," he often said during these talks. "But real strength is about owning up to your errors and doing everything you can to fix them." His words resonated deeply with audiences, particularly young people who admired his honesty and humility. Margaret Klein remained an integral part of the foundation, her role expanding as she grew more confident in her ability to help others. She traveled alongside Norris on occasion, sharing her own experiences and offering guidance to those struggling with similar injustices. Together, they formed a powerful partnership, one rooted in mutual respect and a shared mission to honor Victor's memory. Margaret found joy in seeing how much good could come from something so painful, and Norris cherished the bond they had built through their shared purpose. Ryan Carter, too, continued to play a vital role in documenting the foundation's impact. His exposé had sparked widespread interest, leading to invitations for him to speak at journalism conferences and environmental summits. He embraced the opportunity to amplify the message of accountability and transparency, using his platform to highlight other stories of injustice and resilience. Though he had initially set out simply to uncover the truth, Ryan now saw himself as part of a larger effort to drive positive change. "This isn't just about one man or one river," he told a group of aspiring journalists. "It's about standing up for what's right, no matter how hard it may be." Judge John Roberts also stayed involved, lending his support to initiatives aimed at reforming the legal system. He worked closely with lawmakers to draft legislation designed to prevent miscarriages of justice, like the one that had cost Victor Lane his life. His efforts earned him both praise and criticism, but he remained steadfast in his belief that change was necessary. "We owe it to people like Victor and their families to do better," he said during a press conference announcing the new laws. Justice should never come too late. As time went on, Norris's personal transformation became undeniable. The man once known primarily for his martial arts prowess and action hero persona had reinvented himself as a champion for environmental causes and corporate accountability. He partnered with organizations focused on sustainability, investing in green technologies, and supporting policies aimed at protecting natural resources. His commitment extended beyond financial contributions. He actively participated in campaigns, rallies, and educational programs, determined to use his influence for good. One of the most meaningful moments came when Norris visited Victor Lane's gravesite with Margaret. It was a quiet, intimate occasion, free from cameras or reporters. Standing before the headstone, Norris knelt down and placed a single flower on the grave. "I'm sorry it took so long for the truth to come out," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "But I promise you this, your name will never be forgotten. We'll keep fighting for justice just like you did." Margaret placed a hand on his shoulder, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, they both felt a profound sense of closure, a shared understanding that they had done everything possible to honor Victor's legacy. Back in Chicago, the restored river became a source of pride for the entire community. Families gathered along its banks for picnics and outdoor activities, while local businesses thrived thanks to increased tourism. A plaque was erected near the water's edge, commemorating the cleanup effort and thanking everyone who had contributed. Norris attended the unveiling ceremony, where he stood beside Margaret and Ryan as the crowd cheered. "This river belongs to all of us," he said during his speech, "and together we proved that even the biggest challenges can be overcome if we work as a team." Despite the progress, Norris knew there was still much work to be done. Environmental issues persisted worldwide, and corporate misconduct remained a persistent threat. But he refused to let the enormity of the problem discourage him. Instead, he focused on taking small, consistent steps forward, knowing that every little bit helped. Change doesn't happen overnight, he reminded himself, and others frequently. But if we stay committed, we can create a better future. The media coverage surrounding Norris's redemption arc shifted over time, moving away from sensational headlines to stories highlighting his ongoing contributions. Documentaries were made, books were written, and awards were given. But Norris paid little attention to the accolades. For him, the true reward lay in seeing tangible improvements in people's lives and knowing he had played a part in making them happen. "I don't need recognition," he told a reporter during a rare interview. "What matters is that we're making a difference." Even Judge Roberts found renewed purpose in the aftermath of the case. Though he had always been dedicated to his work, the experience reignited his passion for justice. He began mentoring young lawyers, encouraging them to approach their careers with integrity and compassion. "The law isn't just about rules and penalties," he told a group of law students during a lecture. "It's about protecting people and giving them a voice. Never lose sight of that." As the years passed, the connections forged during the case only grew stronger. Norris, Margaret, Ryan, and Judge Roberts remained close, bound together by the shared experience of uncovering the truth and working toward healing. They celebrated milestones together: the launch of new foundation programs, the passage of landmark legislation, and even personal achievements like birthdays and anniversaries. Their friendship served as a reminder that sometimes, out of adversity, the strongest bonds are formed. Looking back on everything that had transpired, Norris couldn't help but marvel at how differently things might have turned out. Had Judge Roberts not delivered those 6 cryptic words, "This isn't over, not by a long shot," the truth might never have come to light. Those words had been the catalyst for change, forcing everyone involved to dig deeper and confront uncomfortable truths. They had flipped the script, turning what seemed like a devastating blow into an opportunity for growth and redemption. The end, the story of Chuck Norris, Judge John Roberts, and the mysterious 6 words, wasn't just about one man's fall from grace or his subsequent rise. It was about the enduring power of truth, accountability, and forgiveness. It was about the courage to admit when you're wrong and the determination to make things right. And above all, it was about the incredible impact that can be achieved when people come together to fight for justice and a better world. For Norris, the journey had changed him in ways he could never have imagined. He had gone from being a symbol of invincibility to someone vulnerable enough to acknowledge his flaws and brave enough to face them head-on. It was a humbling yet empowering transformation, one that reminded him of what truly mattered in life. As he stood by the river one evening watching the sun dip below the horizon, he felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the second chance he had been given, but for the people who had helped him along the way. "This isn't over," Norris whispered to himself, echoing the judge's words. "Not by a long shot."